She did not know his name when he saved her life. She only knew the cold weight of a gun pressed to her temple, the metallic taste of fear on her tongue, and then a voice. Low, absolute, the kind of voice that does not ask permission from the air it moves through. She heard 3 words and the gun disappeared. She felt the heat of a stranger stepping between her and the barrel. And when she turned to look at him, something impossible woke inside her chest. Something that had been asleep for 55 years. Something she had buried next to a man named Kofi in the red soil of home. Something she had told herself she was finished with. She was wrong. She was completely, beautifully, dangerously wrong. Welcome to Seoul of Africa, where African hearts and Korean souls meet in the most emotional love stories ever told. Subscribe to this channel and turn on your notifications. We have so many more stories waiting for you, and every single one of them hits deeper than the last. The night it all began, Dr. Amara Osei was not supposed to be in that alley. She was supposed to be in the Grand Walker Hill Hotel's main ballroom accepting the Lifetime Achievement Award that the International Cardiovascular Foundation had been attempting to give her for 3 consecutive years. She had declined twice. The third time, her daughter Adwoa had looked at her across the kitchen table with the particular devastating patience that daughters reserve for mothers who are failing themselves, and said, "Mama, you have spent your whole life showing up for other people. Show up for yourself, just once." So Amara had lifted the burgundy gown from the back of her wardrobe where it had been hanging since Lagos. She had spent 45 minutes pinning her silver-threaded locks into a crown. She had taken a taxi to the Walker Hill and walked through its gilded doors, feeling, for the first time in a long time, like a woman who belonged somewhere beautiful. She lasted 40 minutes. The problem was not the award, or the room, or the crystalline chandeliers, or the orchestral murmur of 300 people performing their best versions of themselves. The problem was a woman in a pearl-white dress who had materialized beside Amara at the drinks table with the specific social precision of someone who had done this many times and always enjoyed it. Her name, Amara would later learn, was Choi Soo-yeon. She was 40 and flawless and constructed entirely for maximum social impact. She had spent 11 exquisitely calibrated minutes suggesting in the sweetest voice Amara had ever heard weaponized that a woman of Amara's age and shape attending an event of this caliber alone was perhaps a statement about certain kinds of women. The devoted kind, she said, smiling, who gave everything to their work and forgot to give anything to themselves. She mentioned, as a sympathetic aside, that she had heard the award was something of a pity gesture from a committee that appreciated symbolic diversity. She said it while touching Amara's arm. She looked genuinely concerned. Amara set her glass down. She excused herself with a smile that cost her everything because she was 55 years old and she had survived things that would have shattered women with less bone in their spine, and she was not going to give Choi Soo-yeon the satisfaction of seeing what those words cost her. She walked out of the ballroom through the first exit she could find. The exit opened onto a service corridor. The corridor opened onto a loading bay that smelled of garlic and cold concrete and the particular honest exhaustion of people who worked hard in places that never get photographed. She stood in the November air at the edge of the loading bay and breathed and let the cold of Seoul remind her that she was still here, still whole, still a woman who had opened more chests and restarted more hearts than that pearl-dressed woman would ever be able to count. She was still standing there, performing composure she was not entirely feeling when she heard the sound. It came from the narrow alley that ran behind the loading bay. A scuffle, brief, practiced, the sound of people who knew how to do this quickly. Then voices in rapid Korean, 3 of them, and then a single voice that cut through all 3 with the quiet, absolute authority of something that did not shout because it had never needed to. She heard footsteps retreating, then silence. Then a man stepped into the yellow wash of light from the nearest wall lamp, and she saw the gun loose in his right hand. He was tall, dense, with the kind of presence that had nothing to do with size. His suit was black, fitted with surgical precision, the kind of tailoring that costs more than the hospital equipment she had once fought her department head for 3 months to secure. His face was severe, a sharp jaw, heavy brows, a mouth set in a line that suggested it had not curved in a long time. There was a cut above his right eyebrow, fresh and dark, already pulling at the edges. A thin line of blood ran toward his temple. He was bleeding in the unhurried way of a man who had not noticed or had noticed and decided it was not relevant. He turned his head and found her. Their eyes met. She did not run. She had stood at operating tables with blood on her gloves and a patient's heartbeat running through her fingers and the full weight of a human life in her hands. She understood danger. She also understood that this particular danger was not directed at her. She read his body the way she read patience, the controlled stillness, the loose grip on the weapon, the complete absence of aggression in his posture. This was a man coming down from something, not ramping up toward it. She held his gaze with the calm precision she had spent 30 years cultivating and waited for the world to tell her what came next. He looked at her for 3 full seconds. Then he said in English that was perfect and clearly not his first language, "You should not be here." "Neither should you," she said. Something moved through his expression. Not a smile, something quieter, more interesting. He looked at the gun in his right hand with a brief, acknowledging glance and slid it into his jacket with the casual economy of a man returning a pen to his breast pocket. "You are bleeding," Amara said. "I am aware. Above your right eye. The laceration is deep enough to require closure. If you leave it, it will scar badly and carry a significant infection risk." He looked at her with a flatness that would have made most people step back. "Are you a doctor?" "Cardiothoracic surgeon, 30 years. Retired 2 years ago." She paused for exactly 1 beat. "I still carry a suture kit in my evening bag." The flatness held. Then, "Why?" "Because I spent 20 years working in hospitals across West Africa, where the nearest blood supply was sometimes 4 hours away, and I decided early on that I would rather be prepared than helpless." She tilted her head. "Would you like me to close that cut, or would you prefer to stand here bleeding on an excellent suit?" He was quiet for 2 seconds. Then he sat down on a delivery crate near the wall with the matter-of-fact efficiency of a man making a practical decision and looked up at her with those dark, measuring eyes. "Thank you," he said, like someone who chose the word carefully. She stitched him in the alley behind the Walker Hill Hotel with the small kit she carried in her evening bag, the fine thread running through the needle under the yellow wall lamp, while the city hummed its enormous, indifferent hum above them. Her hands were completely steady. She had performed procedures in worse conditions. Field hospitals in the rain, a kitchen in Kumasi during a power cut, once, memorably, on a fishing boat off the coast of Cape 3 Points because the patient could not wait and the Coast Guard was 2 hours away. A cut eyebrow in a clean alley was almost comfortable. He watched her work, not the way frightened people watched, arms tight, breath held. He watched with the open, genuine attention of someone who was genuinely interested in what was happening. She felt his gaze on her face and her hands without discomfort because it was not a possessive gaze or a calculating one. It was simply paying attention. It was the rarest thing. When she was done, she pressed the closure strip and stepped back. He stood. He reached into his jacket. She thought for one brief, strange second that he was reaching for the gun again. Instead, he produced a business card. Plain, heavy cream paper, a name in both Korean and English, nothing else, and held it out. "If you ever need anything," he said. She looked at the card. She looked at him. "I stitched a cut. That does not create a debt." "No," he agreed, "but it does create a curiosity. I would like to know more about a woman who carries sutures to an awards gala and uses them in an alley without blinking." His name, she read from the card, was Shin Jae-won. She took the card. She did not look back as she walked out of the alley, but she felt his gaze on her until the moment she turned the corner, and the warmth of it, the specific, attentive warmth of being truly seen, stayed on her skin long after the Seoul night had swallowed everything else. The next morning, a package arrived at her apartment door. Amara unwrapped it at her kitchen table, standing in her robe with her hibiscus tea going cold beside her. Inside, nested in black tissue paper, was a bottle of medical-grade antiseptic, a box of professional closure strips, and a small card in handwriting so precise it looked like architectural drafting for future alleys. SJW. She stood holding the card for a long moment. Then she laughed, sudden and genuine, the kind of laugh that comes from somewhere below the ribs when the world does something genuinely unexpected. She told herself it was a wealthy man's polished gesture. She had not survived 55 years, 3 continents, widowhood, 2 daughters, and a career in rooms where the stakes were literally life and death by letting charm knock her off balance. She was a woman of considerable composure. She knew her own mind. She did not need a mysterious Korean man with excellent taste in suits and a cut above his eyebrow to unsettle her. She called the number on the card anyway. He answered on the first ring, which she noted and filed away. She explained that she was calling with a professional inquiry. She wanted to confirm that the sutures were holding and that no infection had developed since she had not been able to follow up the night before. It was a reasonable clinical inquiry. It was completely true and also slightly an excuse, and she was self-aware enough to know the difference. He said he was fine, that he had examined the wound that morning and it looked precisely as it should. Then, without pausing, he asked how long she had been in Seoul. They talked for 43 minutes, not about the wound. He asked about her work, not the polite performance version of asking, the brief surface-level questions that expect short answers and serve mostly as filler between the questioner's own thoughts. He asked the way people asked when they genuinely needed to understand something. He asked about the technique she had developed for high-risk elderly patients. He asked about the paper she had published in 2021, specifically about the methodology on page 14. And she felt the specific pleasure of a person who has produced something careful and difficult, discovering that someone else has engaged with it fully. "You have read the paper," she said. "3 times, he said. "I had a question about the risk stratification model on page 14 that I was not able to resolve satisfactorily from the text alone." She put down her cold tea. She pulled her reading glasses onto her nose and talked about page 14 for 20 minutes without stopping, and she could not remember the last time she had done that. Talked about the work at full volume without managing someone else's interest level or simplifying for an audience that was not a peer. When she finally paused for breath, he said, "Your methodology implies a deliberate conservatism in the threshold setting. You were protecting surgeons who would apply this in under-resourced settings." "Yes," she said. "You wrote the paper for the surgeon who would never attend your masterclass," he said. "I write everything for that surgeon," she said. A silence that had the particular quality of 2 people recognizing something in each other. He told her then about the donation, directly, without ceremony. He had funded the cardiovascular research wing at Asen Medical Center 3 years ago, anonymously. He had read her 2021 paper in the grant committee's academic justification materials and decided the research deserved support. He had not expected, he said, to meet its author in a hotel alley 11 months later. "Were you disappointed?" she asked. "When you saw me?" "The opposite," he said, simply, without elaboration. She went to bed that night and lay on her back looking at the ceiling of her Seoul apartment and thought about a man who funded research he would never publicly claim credit for and asked about page 14 and said the opposite like it cost him nothing. She met him for coffee 3 days later at a small cafe in Mapo that he chose because it was quiet and good and completely unpretentious, which told her several things about him. He was already seated when she arrived, at a corner table with sight lines to every door. She noted that. He stood when she walked in. Not performed, not deliberate, automatic, the reflex of someone raised with certain instincts. She noted that, too. He had his page 14 question ready. She had her answer ready. They argued about surgical risk methodology for 35 minutes before either coffee arrived and neither of them noticed. She felt the specific electric pleasure of disagreeing productively with someone whose intelligence she respected, and she watched him take her pushback with the composure of a man who was genuinely interested in being corrected when she was right, which was, she came to understand, over the course of that conversation, not a quality as common as it should be. When the coffee finally arrived, they both reached for their cups, and there was a brief, accidental moment of stillness in the argument where they looked at each other across the small table, and she became aware, suddenly, and with the particular sharpness of a surgeon's attention, that his eyes were not just dark. They were warm, very specifically warm when directed at her, and that the warmth had been there the whole time, and she had been too engaged in the argument about page 14 to register it. She registered it now. She reached for her coffee. By the end of that week, she had learned several things about Shin Jae-won. He was the chairman of the Shin Meridian Group, a conglomerate that operated across shipping, real estate, and private equity, with the quiet, systematic reach of something that had been growing for decades and had no interest in being seen doing it. He sat on the boards of 3 foundations. He had funded 7 hospitals anonymously across Southeast Asia. He spoke 4 languages fluently. He had never married. He had not been in a public relationship in 11 years. His name in certain Seoul circles was spoken the way weather is spoken, not as a person but as a condition, something you prepared for. He texted her at 7 in the morning, every morning, not small talk, not the performance of connection, something real every time. The first message, the 2019 European Journal follow-up study on your technique. The lead author misapplied your regression model. Did you see it? She had. She texted back immediately. I sent a correction. They published it 6 months later on page 47 without acknowledgement. He replied in 11 seconds, typical. Your correction was more interesting than their original paper. The third morning, what made you choose cardiothoracic surgery? She sat with it before answering. Then, my father died of heart failure when I was 9. In a hospital that didn't have what it needed. I decided I would become what that hospital was missing. 3 minutes passed. Then, I understand that kind of decision. That is how the most important things are built. From the thing that broke you first. She read that message 4 times. The 5th morning, are you free on Saturday? She told herself she would decline. She was 55, and she had a life structured carefully around work she loved, and a daughter in the same city, and a rhythm of solitude she had not admitted was loneliness, because she was still not entirely sure it was. She did not need to rearrange any of it for a man she had known for 8 days, no matter how precisely he asked questions or how accurately he described the architecture of grief. She said yes. He took her to Bukchon Hanok village on a Saturday, when the late autumn light came through the old rooftops in long amber slants, and the lanes were narrow enough to require walking close together, and the city felt briefly like a village, and everything was honest and unhurried. They walked for 3 hours. They talked about everything. Her daughters, Adwoa in Seoul doing epidemiological research, Aqua in London writing music she sent her mother on voice notes at 2 in the morning. His sister Jiyeon in Busan, who called every Sunday and was the only person who could make him laugh fully. His father, who had built something extraordinary and in his final years had almost destroyed it through a single catastrophic decision, and how Jae-won had spent 8 years quietly, invisibly undoing the damage without ever letting his father know it was being done. You protected him, Amara said. They were standing at the top of the village, the city spread below them, a cold wind coming off the Han. I protected what the men who built it with him deserved, he said. My father made a human mistake. That does not erase 30 years of building. But you were angry. Yes. And you did it anyway. Anger and love are not opposites, he said quietly. I have been angry at people I love my entire life. It does not change what you do for them. She turned to look at him. The wind moved between them, cold and clean. Amika used to say something like that, she said. The name came out without its usual careful handling, which surprised her. My husband, he used to say that devotion and disappointment were the same muscle. Jae-won looked at her. You do not usually say his name. She paused. No. I noticed. She looked at him for a long moment. The city below them was going golden in the late afternoon. He died 12 years ago, she said. Cardiac arrhythmia. I diagnosed it myself, and I spent 4 months pretending I had it under control because I could not bear to see his face when I told him the truth. She breathed. He died in a hospital that had everything it needed. I was in the room. I did everything right. It was not enough. Jaewon was quiet. He did not say I am sorry in the reflexive, inadequate way most people said it. He let the silence be what it was, a space that held something real, and then he said, he knew how much you loved him. Yes, she said. He did. Then it was enough, he said. Not medically, but the part that mattered. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned back to the city, and they stood there together, shoulder to shoulder, in the specific warmth of two people who have stopped needing to fill silence with anything other than presence. The wind came up again and her scarf lifted. Without thinking, without ceremony, without asking, he reached over and tucked it back against her neck. His fingers brushed the warmth of her skin for one brief charged second. He stepped back. Neither of them remarked on it. She felt the place where his hand had been for the rest of the afternoon, the rest of the evening. She pressed her fingers there on the taxi ride home like a woman checking a wound that was also not a wound at all. The trouble with Dr. Kwame Asante arrived 3 weeks later. He was 48, Ghanaian British, brilliant, and devastatingly easy to be around in the way that certain men were. No edges, no demands, the comfortable warmth of a person who had decided a long time ago that life was better when everyone in the room felt at ease. He had been trying to move their professional friendship toward something warmer for 2 years in the patient, persistent way of a man who believed the right woman would eventually recognize what was available. He found Amara at the quarterly conference and seated himself beside her at dinner and spent the evening making her laugh and talking about their shared work with a fluency and genuine enthusiasm that she found, honestly, refreshing. He asked her to dinner the following Friday. She said she would think about it. She texted Shin Jae-won the next morning, not because she was required to, because telling him things had become a reflex she had not noticed forming until it was already formed. She mentioned it casually. A colleague had asked her to dinner. She was considering it. He read it. He did not respond for 49 minutes, which was entirely unlike him. When his response came, it was 3 words. Who is he? She told him. She watched the 3 dots appear and disappear twice before his response arrived. Are you going? She looked at her phone for a long moment. I haven't decided. Why? No response for 12 minutes. Then, no reason. Have a good day, Amara. She stared at that message. Then she put her phone down and sat in the quiet of her office and felt something warm and complicated move through her that she refused to name but could not entirely suppress. That same afternoon, Shin Jae-won's assistant contacted the conference office for the following week's medical symposium and requested a seating adjustment. Dr. Osi was moved from her assigned table to the keynote table, his table. When Amara arrived at the symposium dinner 3 days later and found her name beside his, he looked up from his conversation with the sort of composed, completely unconvincing innocence that she suspected he had never actually needed to practice before. You arranged this, she said quietly, leaning toward him. I have absolutely no idea what you mean, he said and pulled out her chair. She sat. She was failing to suppress a smile. You are not subtle. I am extraordinarily subtle, he said. You simply pay more attention than most people. Across the long table, Dr. Kwame Asante arrived and found himself seated 3 places from where he had expected to be. He looked at Amara. He looked at the man beside her. The particular quality of attention Jae-won was paying her, the way his shoulder was angled toward her, the way his eyes tracked back to her face at regular intervals with the specific focus of someone who had stopped pretending to be simply watching the room. Kwame understood what had happened. It showed briefly in his expression, a careful recalibration, and then he was charming and easy and professional for the rest of the evening because he was a good man and a perceptive one. Jae-won never glanced at him once. He did not need to. He simply made Amara so completely the center of his attention for the duration of the dinner that the idea of her turning towards someone else became impractical in the pleasantest possible way. He asked her things. He disagreed with her things. He made her laugh twice, quietly, in the way that happened between 2 people when they had accumulated enough shared references to make shorthand jokes. He reached for the breadbasket at the same moment she did, and their fingers touched, and he did not pull back quickly. Later in the car park, she stopped and looked at him. "You were jealous," she said. He held her gaze without flinching. "Yes." The honesty of it was so direct, so undefended that it caught her completely off balance. She had expected the deflection, the smile, the explanation that reframed what was obvious as something else. Not that single clean word. "We are not together," she said carefully. "I know what we are and what we are not," he said. His voice was very even. "That did not change what I felt when I read your message this morning." He paused. "I am not going to lie to you about what I feel. Not to you specifically." The night was cold and clear, and Seoul hung above and around them, indifferent and enormous, doing nothing to help. "Jaewon," she said. "You do not have to say anything tonight," he said. "I am not asking for an answer or a decision. I am simply telling you the truth because you deserve accurate information about the people in your life." She walked home. She lay in bed with her eyes open and felt, for the first time in 12 years, the specific terrifying sensation of a door inside her that had been closed for a long time beginning, slowly and without asking permission, to open. The threat arrived on a Tuesday evening in the form of an open apartment door. Amara came home from the medical center at 7:15 to find her front door standing ajar. She stopped in the hallway. She pressed her back to the wall beside the door and listened for 30 seconds, which was a thing she had never thought she would need to know how to do. And yet here she was, 55 years old, listening for movement in her own apartment with the flat, controlled attention of someone managing a situation. Nothing moved inside. She pushed the door fully open and stepped in. The apartment had been searched, professionally. Nothing broken, nothing theatrical. The kind of search you only recognize if you know your own space precisely, which she did because she was a woman of considerable order and everything had a place. Her desk had been disturbed. Her laptop stood open at an angle she had not left it. On her kitchen table, arranged in a deliberate, careful line, were 4 photographs. Adwoa's apartment building in Seoul, Adwoa's regular route to the university, Aqua's office address in London, the medical center's staff parking level with a vehicle circled in red, and a card, plain and white, with 4 words in clean English: "Stay away from him." Her hands were shaking, not from fear, from a cold, precise fury she recognized from operating theaters, the specific anger that arrived when something threatened a patient she was responsible for. She sat down at her kitchen table and looked at the photographs of her daughters, and she made herself breathe slowly, steadily, in and out, until the shaking stopped. Then she picked up her phone. Jaewon answered before the second ring. She told him in a flat, factual voice what she had found. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "Do not touch anything. Keep all the lights on. Sit in the center of the main room and wait. I am coming." Then, before hanging up, "Amara, you are safe. I am coming." He arrived in 13 minutes with Do-hyun and 3 other men who moved through her apartment with the systematic efficiency of people who did this routinely. They photographed everything, bagged the card, cataloged the photographs, checked every entry point, swept for devices. Jaewon stood in her kitchen with the photographs of her daughters on the table in front of him, and she watched something very cold and very particular move through his face. Not rage, which would have been easier to read. Something colder and more focused than rage, the expression of a man converting a feeling into a plan. When his men were done, he came and sat beside her on the sofa, not across from her. Beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, and she understood that the proximity was intentional and protective, and she did not move away. "His name is Ryu Tae-sung," Jaewon said. "He runs a competing organization. We have been in a dispute over Incheon port contracts for 18 months. He cannot beat me in a direct confrontation, so he targets adjacencies." "I am not an adjacency," Amara said. He turned to look at her. "No," he said. "You are not." A pause. "That is why he chose you." She absorbed this. She looked at the photographs of her daughters. She looked back at him. "My daughters," she said, "will be protected tonight. I have already made the calls. You will tell me exactly what protection means in practical terms, and I will decide whether it is sufficient," she said. Her voice was even. He held her gaze. "Of course." And she understood from the way he said it that it had not occurred to him to do otherwise. That was the thing about him that continued to catch her off balance. He treated her intelligence and her authority over her own life as simply the correct state of affairs. He did not manage her, he informed her. He asked her. He waited for her answer. And Ryu Tae-sung? She said. He will understand by morning that this was a mistake, Jae-won said quietly, and that it does not get repeated. What does that mean? He looked at her steadily. Nothing that will endanger anyone. Ryu responds to economic pressure. I will apply it in ways that make continuing this particular strategy too costly to sustain. A pause. I will tell you everything I do. You have the right to know. She stayed that night in a safe house in Seongbuk-dong that was warm and quiet and stocked. She found this when she went to make her tea, with dried hibiscus petals and fresh ginger beside the kettle. She stood looking at them for a long moment, thinking about a man who had clearly asked someone to find out how she made her tea and ensured it would be there when she needed it. She made her tea. She sat in the window. She heard him in the next room, his voice very quiet and very cold on the phone, and she did not understand all the Korean, but she understood enough. She went to bed knowing that by morning, Ryu Tae-sung would have learned something important. 3 days later, they argued, a real one. She had arrived at the medical center to find a man she did not recognize standing at the entrance in a position that was unmistakably surveillance. She had walked past him, kept her face neutral, completed her morning, and then called Jae-won from her office with the door closed and her voice controlled and precise. I found a guard at the medical center entrance this morning, she said. I did not agree to a guard at the medical center entrance. A brief silence. He was there to ensure. I know why he was there, she said. That is not the point. The point is that you made a decision about my life without consulting me. She paused. Do you understand the difference between protecting someone and controlling them? A longer silence. Yes, he said. I do. Then I need you to explain to me why you did this. Because I woke up at 3 in the morning thinking about those photographs on your kitchen table. His voice was very quiet. Because the thought of Ryu or anyone connected to him being in proximity to you while I am not, I could not sit with that without doing something. And I made a decision without asking you first, because when I am afraid I act rather than consult. That is a failure, and I am telling you so directly. She sat with the silence for a moment. Are you afraid? She said carefully. Yes, he said. More than I have been afraid of anything in a very long time. She closed her eyes briefly. I will accept one person, she said. Not at the entrance. Somewhere she is not visible to patients, and they do not enter consultation rooms. Agreed. And you ask me first. Every time. No exceptions. Yes. J1. Yes. You are the most complicated man I have encountered in 55 years. A brief pause. Then, so quietly she felt it more than heard it. You are the most extraordinary woman I have met in 57. She put the phone down. She sat in her office with the morning light coming through the window and her hands folded on her desk, and she breathed through something she did not have an entirely clinical explanation for. That evening, he took her to dinner at a small barbecue restaurant in Mapo with no reservation system and paper menus and the deep warmth of a place that had been feeding the same neighborhood for 30 years. He grilled the meat himself, which she had not expected, and his hands over the grill were careful and unhurried in the same way they were careful and unhurried with everything. She watched him and thought, this man has been alone for a long time, not by circumstance, by standard, because no one met the particular requirements of his silence. She told him about Kofi that night, all of it, the floor plans on napkins, the scale models of imaginary houses, the 3 nights in the ICU, the morning in March. She talked until the grill went cold. He listened without moving, without filling the silence with comfort that would have only covered what she was actually saying. When she was done, he reached across the table and laid his hand over hers. Not a gesture of romance. The gesture of someone who understood that certain things needed to be witnessed and that witnessing without editorializing was its own form of care. She turned her hand over. She held his. He walked her home. At her door, in the corridor light, he turned to face her. She looked at the cut above his eyebrow, clean now, healing, the line of her sutures still faintly visible. The fact that her hands had put that there, in the alley, on the night they met. Something about that detail undid her in a way she had not anticipated. He looked at her. Just looked with those dark, warm, attentive eyes. "Don't make it a question," she said. He stepped forward. What happened in the moments that followed lived entirely in the language of two people who had been careful and deliberate and patient for a very long time and had run together out of every reason to continue. The world outside the door went on being the world. Seoul breathed and moved, and in the warm, quiet corridor, something that had been waiting arrived at last. She was gone before the city fully woke. Not dramatic, just gone. Her side of the room undisturbed except for the impression of her presence, and a note on the kitchen counter in her precise surgical handwriting, "I need to think." "I am sorry." Shin Jae-won read it twice. He set it down carefully. He stood in the kitchen of his safe house in the gray Seoul morning and understood what had happened the way he understood most things, completely, immediately, and without the comfort of pretending otherwise. She was afraid, not of him, of the door she had opened the night before and what living beyond it would require of her. He knew the specific architecture of that fear because he had lived inside his own version of it for 11 years. The careful constructed life, the empire that demanded everything and provided a very convincing substitute for the things it didn't. He gave her the morning. He gave her the afternoon. He sent one text at 4 o'clock. "I am not going anywhere. Take whatever time you need. But I will come find you when you are ready. That is a promise." She did not reply. He gave her 2 more days. He worked. He managed the ongoing negotiations with Ryu's organization with the cold, systematic pressure that had always been his most effective instrument. He checked the security reports from his people watching her building and Adwoa's building and Akua's address in London. He ate breakfast alone, which he had done for 11 years and which had never previously felt like a condition. On the morning of the 3rd day, Do-hyun walked into his office without knocking, which meant the information was urgent. He closed the door. He stood in front of the desk with the expression he wore when something required careful delivery. "Ryu moved," Do-hyun said. Jae-won went very still. She was taken from the medical center at approximately 7 this evening. 2 men, professional. The escort was rendered unconscious. He's stable. She was put in a vehicle. Do-hyun set a tablet on the desk with a location on the screen. Guro District, one of Ryu's secondary facilities, 40 minutes ago. Shin Jae-won stood up from his desk. He said, "How many men do we have available right now?" 11 ready. More in 20 minutes. 11 is enough. He came around the desk. He picked up his jacket. "Call everyone. I am driving." Do-hyun, who had been beside this man for 22 years and had seen him cold and precise and ruthless and occasionally something approaching tender, noted that his hands, as he put on his jacket, were not entirely steady. He said nothing. He made the calls. He got in the car. The building in Guro was a disused logistics warehouse, 3 floors, industrial lighting, security that was built for deterrence and had never anticipated what was coming for it. Shin Jae-won's team arrived from 4 entry points simultaneously at 11 minutes past 8. They moved through the building with the clean, systematic efficiency of people who had a single objective and no interest in anything else. Jae-won took the stairs. He had not waited in cars while other people acted on his behalf since he was 29 years old and had learned, through a loss he did not discuss, that some things required your presence in the room. This was one of those things. The 3rd floor room was locked. It was not locked for long. He pushed the door open and found her. She was seated in the center of the room, wrists bound behind the chair, her burgundy dress from the gala torn at one shoulder. Her chin was up. Her eyes were open and alert and tracking. She was not crying. She had been working one of her wrists toward freedom with the methodical patience of a woman who has decided to solve her own problem and is simply waiting for the geometry to cooperate. She looked at the door when it opened. She saw him. Something moved through her face that he had never seen there before. Not relief. That was too simple, too surface. Something deeper, something that lived in the place where the things we refuse to admit wanting reside until the moment we can no longer pretend we don't. He crossed the room. He crouched in front of her and cut the binding from her wrists with the small knife from his jacket. His hands worked quickly and carefully, and he said nothing. When the binding fell away, he looked at her wrists, the marks there, red and raw, and he felt something move through him that he kept entirely off his face and entirely in his chest, where it stayed and stayed and stayed. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "My wrists. Nothing requiring intervention." Her voice was steady. You came. I told you I would. I didn't answer your texts. That was not a condition, he said. She looked at him. He looked at her. The warehouse was loud around them with the controlled sounds of his men, and none of it was in the room with them at all. I left, she said. After, I left without explanation, and I didn't answer you for 3 days, and you still came. Yes. Why? He was quiet for a moment. Then, because when I said I was coming, I meant it. Because your reasons for leaving were about fear, not about not wanting this. I know the difference. He paused. And because I had 11 years of practice not coming for things, and I am finished with that particular skill. She looked at him for a long time. In the background, Do-hyun's voice, activity, the sounds of a completed operation. I was afraid, she said. I am still afraid. I lost Kofi, and I rebuilt myself, and I became someone who did not need. I told myself I did not need. She stopped, breathed. And then you found my hibiscus tea. He held her gaze. What? In the safe house. You had someone find out how I make my tea and put it by the kettle. She looked at him. That is the most devastating thing anyone has done for me in 12 years. A bag of dried hibiscus and fresh ginger. I stood in front of it, and I understood that you had been paying that kind of attention for weeks, and I was terrified of what it meant to let myself need that. The warehouse was cold and industrial and utterly wrong for this moment, and also completely right, because they were both the kind of people who did important things in inconvenient places. He reached up and touched her face with one hand, just his palm against her cheek, steady and warm. I need you to know, he said, that the tea is only the beginning. There is more where that came from. There is so much more. She put her hand over his. Take me home, she said. 2 months later, the International Cardiovascular Foundation held its annual gala for the 4th year running. For the 4th year, they sent Dr. Amara Ose an invitation. For the 4th year, it included a Lifetime Achievement citation. For the first time, she accepted without needing her daughter to convince her. She wore the amber gown, deep and rich and entirely unapologetic. She wore her silver-threaded locks loose around her shoulders. She wore gold earrings that had belonged to her mother and carried nothing in her evening bag except her phone and her lip gloss because she no longer needed to be prepared for Allie's. She had someone who handled Allie's now, and the arrangement suited her completely. Shin Jae-won was waiting at the entrance of the Grand Walker Hill Hotel when she arrived. He was in charcoal, always charcoal, and he looked at her coming up the steps with an expression that was not calibrated for an audience. It was simply his face when she was in front of him, everything present, nothing managed. You look, he started. I know, she said and took his arm. The room changed when they entered it, the way rooms changed for him always, the familiar recalibration. But tonight it changed differently, because now the room was also watching her, the woman on his arm, the woman in amber who moved with the ease of someone who had earned the right to take up exactly as much space as she occupied and had stopped apologizing for the dimensions of her presence. The whispers ran through the event the way whispers always ran. People tried to work out who she was. Several of them already knew. Choi Soo-yeon was present. She saw them from across the room. She processed what she was looking at. This woman, this gown, this man's attention. And her expression went through several things, none of which were comfortable, and all of which were instructive. Amara saw her. Their eyes met for 3 seconds. Amara inclined her head once, a greeting that was also a very complete sentence, and then turned back to Jae-won and forgot about Choi Soo-yeon entirely and permanently. The award was presented after dinner. She walked to the stage and accepted it with the composure of a woman who had built something worth honoring and knew it. She spoke for 4 minutes. She thanked her students scattered across 4 continents, her patients, especially the 17-year-old boy with the hole in his heart, who had become a teacher in Accra and sent her a letter every year on the anniversary of his surgery. She thanked her daughters, who were the most impressive people she had ever met and who had not gotten that way by accident. She thanked her mother, who had always believed that the only thing between a woman and everything was the decision to reach for it. She found Jae-won at his table. His eyes were steady on her. And I want to thank, she said, the people who find us when we have stopped looking, who notice the details before we think to be noticed, who teach us that complete and full are not the same country and that it is never too late to cross the border. She stepped off the stage. He was waiting at the bottom. He took the award from her hand so she could settle her wrap. He handed it back. He covered her hand with his for one moment, warm and certain. 55 years, he said quietly. She looked at him. And every single one of them brought me here, she said. 6 months after the night in the Guro warehouse, on a Sunday in Bukchon when the first snow of winter was coming down in the unhurried way of snow that has nowhere to be and no deadline, Shin Jae-won made breakfast. This was not unusual. Sunday mornings had become a country they shared. Slow, undemanding, entirely their own. He cooked. She sat at the kitchen table in his Bukchon residence with her tea and her reading glasses and her journal and the particular unhurried presence of a woman who had finally, genuinely stopped filling her own silence with work. He watched her from the stove the way he had been watching her for months, the way he had been watching her since an alley behind the Walker Hill Hotel, and felt the thing he always felt when he watched her. That impossible, specific, overwhelming gratitude for the night she walked out of the wrong door and into a city alley with surgical sutures in her evening bag. He came to the table with 2 plates. He sat across from her. He reached into the pocket of his linen shirt and set a ring on the table between them. He did not kneel. He did not perform. He met her eyes. "I am not going to make a speech," he said. "You know what you are to me. You have known for a while." He paused. "What I want to know is whether you will choose this. Whether you will let this be the next thing we build." She looked at the ring. Amber stone, warm gold. Exactly the color of the gown she had worn to the gala. He had thought about this for months, and she could see it, and she loved him for it in a way that had nothing tentative about it anymore. She thought about Kofi, who had drawn houses on napkins and died in March, and whom she would carry always, not as grief anymore, but as gratitude. For the years, for the love, for the understanding of what it meant to be fully seen by another person that made her able to recognize it now, when it was standing in front of her in a linen shirt in a snowy kitchen asking her a question. "Yes," she said. She picked up the ring and put it on her own finger, which made something in his face do what faces did when something long hoped for arrived without warning. She reached across the table. She held his hand. "One condition," she said. "Name it. Sunday mornings are ours, forever. No empire before 9 o'clock. No calls, no doyun, no crises, just this." He looked at her hand in his. He looked at her face. "Forever," he said, without negotiation, without reservation. Outside, the snow continued its unhurried arrival. Seoul breathed and moved and did not pause. In the warm kitchen, 2 people who had been whole separately were sitting with the extraordinary discovery of what full actually felt like. 3 months later, on a Tuesday morning while Jae-won was in a meeting with the board of the Shin Meridian Group, and Amara was eating breakfast alone and reading a paper about a new valve technique developed by one of her former students in Toronto, she looked at a date on her phone. She sat with it. She did her arithmetic slowly, carefully, the way she did everything that mattered. She set her phone down. She picked it up. She called her daughter Adwoa. Adwoa answered on the second ring. "Mama, you never call on weekdays." "I know," Amara said. "Adwoa, I need to tell you something." The silence on the line had the specific quality of a daughter who has learned that her mother's pauses carry weight. "Mama," Adwoa said slowly, Are you pregnant?" Amara looked out the window at the snow that was still coming down in the slow, beautiful, unhurried way it had been coming all week. "Yes," she said. The sound Adwoa made could be heard, it was later reported, from the hallway of the epidemiology building at Seoul National University. She called Aqua in London while still on the phone with her mother. Aqua screamed and booked a flight within the hour. That evening, Amara sat across from Shin Jae-won at the kitchen table where he had proposed on a snowy Sunday, and she told him. He was still for a long time. Then he reached across the table and held her face in both his hands and pressed his forehead to hers, and she felt him breathing, unsteady, genuine, completely exposed, and she thought, This is what the door was for. This is what was waiting on the other side of 55 years of being complete. "We are going to need a bigger table," he said, his voice rough. She laughed. Full and warm and completely unbothered, in the kitchen, in the snow, in the life she had stopped expecting and received anyway. "We are going to need several bigger things," she said. He laughed too. Open, unguarded, the laugh his sister had described to Amara once as the rarest sound in Seoul. She was hearing it again, and she thought, I will hear it every day. I will make sure of it. This is what it looks like when a woman who spent 55 years showing up for everyone else finally, quietly, joyfully, completely, lets someone show up for her. The room at the Walker Hill Hotel never recovered from what he said that night. Neither did she. Neither did he. They didn't need to. They had something better than recovered. They had chosen. If you find this story interesting, please subscribe for more lovely stories like this, and don't forget to like, comment, and share. Thank you. See you in the next video.